All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Cassard, and I am the director of the Resilient Adaptive Climate Technology think tank at the University of Maryland. I want to welcome you to the Redevelopment Authority, Prince George's County, RFP 2021-4 Forestville Townhouse Smart Community Workshop webinar. Go ahead, Brian. Next slide.
I mean, do we want to give people a few more minutes or not?
Nope.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to go over is some of the webinar housekeeping before we actually get into content. Next slide, please. As you know that this webinar is being recorded, we're also having automatic closed captioning that is done by automated by the computer. So therefore, there may be errors, accuracy in understanding what we are saying. We will we may be able to edit afterwards, depending on how it turns out. Next slide. Okay. First of all, please, everyone, keep your phone on a microphone on your desktop on mute until if you are a speaker, panelist, you will turn it on when I introduce you. Also, set your phones to vibrate so there aren't a lot of interruptions while you're speaking. Next slide. All right, the questions and answers are going to be handled in a very specific way. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box. The questions will be monitored throughout the webinar, and then there are 3 question and answer sessions that are on the agenda today. I will get to the agenda in a minute. And these sessions will be moderated by Brian Quinn, and he will direct the questions to the appropriate speaker during these Q&A sessions that are planned. Please note that all answers given during the live webinar are provisional only. All questions will be collected and formal answers will be issued. If you are viewing this webinar as a recording, you can still email your questions to the email address here for Ernest Williams. Here are the things that we anticipate will be made available on the RDA website: a digital recording of this webinar, a text transcript of the closed captioning of the webinar, an appendix with additional resources of webinar topics, and a list of questions and the official answers. They will be posted at the website on this link here. I wanted to welcome you all to introduce you to the think tank. Our website is there, linked on this slide. Next. Okay, who we are. We are a transdisciplinary group of designers, engineers, ecologists, architects, and researchers that are committed to climate action. We have origins as Team Maryland medalists in 3 U.S. Department of Energy solar decathlons since 2007. We aim to make realistic and substantial climate positive impacts on the residential real estate development aspirations of Prince George's County. And this comes from two areas: the fact that the University of Maryland is a land grant institution, and so therefore outreach and extension is a very important mission to the university, as well as the Solar Decathlon has in the past 20 some years been dedicated to trying to make an impact on renewable energy in the residential real estate world. We strive to look for opportunities to initiate collaborations with the building and energy industry, with government, and community engagement. We embrace social, racial, environmental, and energy justice in our activities. We hope this project will lay the groundwork for a more generally applicable development process and standard for future county projects by advancing forward-looking guidelines that respond to the growing imperatives of climate change and environmental degradation. Here is the agenda for today's meeting, and this slide will come up intermittently with an indicator with a highlight in yellow of where we are in the agenda. So you see on this slide, we are here at housekeeping. Next slide. Now we're going to turn it over to Stephen Paul and Ernest Williams to give us a official welcome from the Redevelopment Authority of Prince George's County.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Paul. I'm the Executive Director, Redevelopment Authority of Prince George's County. We're really excited about this project and appreciate your interest in it. We've got a couple goals here for this workshop. First is simply to make it clear on how to respond to this RFP. And what we're looking for from the responses, and just the logistics and processes for responding. Secondly, we want to provide more information on how these green features and sustainable features and carbon neutral features that we're looking for to be a part of this development, how that will be implemented in practice. And we really hope to set your mind at ease by the end of this workshop that these things are achievable in a financially feasible way and using the existing technologies that we have today. Overall goals for the redevelopment project here. First is the sustainable, carbon neutral, the green features that you're going to hear about today. We believe this is not just the way that we should be developing in the future, but the way we should be developing now. And this is doable. So we really do want this to be a model, a demonstration project that shows really developers and communities around the country that this is what we should be doing now and that we can do it now. Secondly, we're targeting first-time home buyers. So that means the ultimate buyers of these townhouses will be in the 80 to 120% income range, area median income. And that translates into sales prices for the homes up to about $400,000, maybe even a little bit higher than that. And we don't need 100% of the units to be designated for first-time home buyers in those income ranges, but the more units, the better. And we really think that it is possible to do 100%, but we're not necessarily requiring 100%. Our third goal is the local and minority participation in the project. We have a 40% equity participation goal, and I do want to emphasize that's a goal. That's not a minimum standard, and also that's local and or minority participation. So you can achieve that with local companies, MBE companies that may or may not be local. As you've seen from the RFP, there's multiple entities involved in this project. It's not solely just the Redevelopment Authority, but we will be the landowner. The property is currently owned by Pepco, but it's scheduled to be transferred to the RDA this fall. So all the legal agreements, the purchase and sale agreement, development agreement, et cetera, will be solely with the Redevelopment Authority. PEPCO will stay involved in the project in a formal way. PEPCO, you'll hear more about this later, will be responsible for the microgrid facility, for the construction, the funding, and ultimately the management of that portion of the project. The University of Maryland has been consulting with the Redevelopment Authority all along for this project, and they will be available to continue consulting either with the Redevelopment Authority or ultimately with the selected development team. And also we've got Prince George's County has been a great partner so far. Our Office of Central Services has been helping us with the energy components of this. And the Office of Central Services also will be able to help with the local minority contracting as the project progresses to the construction stages. So that's going to be very helpful. And then also with county involvement, this is a county priority project. So that means the entitlement process, both the plan approvals and the permitting will be facilitated by the county as well. Very helpful with timing in the project. And then ultimately, we're going to have this selected builder and developer as part of this. And the responsibilities for the developer will be the infrastructure construction and ultimately finishing the lots and of course, the entitlement process as well. And it could be the same entity that does both the infrastructure and development as well as the ultimate home building, or it could be multiple companies, a developer and separate builder or builders in addition to that. But we would expect your responses to include both components, both the development and building of the townhouses. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ernest Williams, our project manager for this. And Ernest will be your primary point of contact during the RFP process. And Ernest is just going to go over some of the processes for responding.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this workshop today and allowing us to share some great information on this exciting project. Once again, my name is Ernest Williams, and I will be the project manager for the Forestville Townhome Smart Community Development. And I'm going to highlight some of the logistics we wanted to share with you. Starting off, all submissions must be received by September 30th at noon. The submission will be accepted if only a full electronic copy is submitted by the deadline, but we would expect to receive the hard copies and flash drive within 3 to 5 business days after the submission deadline. And although Patty mostly covered it, as far as the Q&A process is concerned, today individuals can ask questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to address as many questions as possible. The questions asked today will be posted on our website. However, just to clarify, this will not be the last opportunity to make any inquiries. Questions can be submitted to me via email to ey.williams@co.pg.md.us through September 16th at noon. The last set of answers will be posted to the RDA website by September 23rd. Questions will not be accepted via phone, call, or fax. Now, regarding the addendums, the questions, the associated answers, and any additional supplementary information will be released through addendums that will be periodically posted to the site. It is the responsibility of the respondents to regularly check the website for the posting of these addendums. And as a refresher, the reason we're all here, this RFP is for the development of an approximate 32-acre undeveloped site located near the intersection of Forestville Road and Suitland Parkway. After the conclusion of my announcements, the University of Maryland REACT team will describe the site in greater detail. Now, for those of you interested in a site visit, please reach out to me so that we can schedule a time. Susan Marinelli from PEPCO will outline the items that will need to be addressed prior to a site visit during her part of the presentation. And in relation to the selection and timing that Steve mentioned, we plan on making the winning selection by November of this year, and we're targeting early 2022 to have an agreement in place. And finally, we would just like to elevate the fact that the development principles outlined in this RFP are certainly the goals. However, they are not the minimum standards. Thank you.
Okay, as Ernest said, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And fortunately, we're running along smoothly and there are no questions for Ernest or Stephen at this time.
Hey,
So,
Brian,
yes.
I think Chad, we can only directly chat to you.
I know you could put them to everybody or to me. It doesn't make a difference. I'm just going to aggregate whatever I can.
I don't know if it's just me, but the only option is for you.
Oh, okay.
From me,
That's
so I don't know if that's for everybody else.
okay. So I mean, if it gets to me, that's fine. But it's all being recorded. This all goes out to everything, anyways. So okay. Anything else, really quick? Any more housekeeping before we move forward? All right, Patty.
Is it Patty or is it Garth next?
Go ahead, Garth.
Okay, great. So again, my name is Garth Rockkessel. I'm an emeritus professor at the University of Maryland, and I'm been a professor at the university for 18 years, and I'm involved in this project and in the earlier projects that were the source of interest that the county and PEPCO had, the solar decathlon projects, in drawing us in and helping us advance the interests and ideas possible on this site. I'm a practicing architect and have been for just over 40 years. And I've worked on both sides of the table, the public sector and for private developers. And I can tell you from the start that this site and the context that it's in is one of the most interesting and compelling set of circumstances that I've been associated with for some time. It seems like for the past 6 months, the more we see and think and realize the opportunities associated with this initiative and this site and this context, the more excited our team gets, I personally get, and I'm most excited about the ideas that are possible to be manifest on this site and the relationship that is in support of it. I am accompanied today with clinical assistant professor Michael Esbon, who's also on the faculty at Maryland, and his expertise as an architect, landscape architect, and land planner will become part of the presentation. Next slide. Any view of this site from most any vantage reveals bits and pieces of what make this so extraordinary. The site, as in the image to the right, is the red outlined dashed area. You can see its odd shape, largely because it's a leftover site between projects and initiatives around its edges and along its flanks. And right through the heart of the site is one of the more extraordinary spring-fed sieves that serve the Hinson watershed. And it's adjacent on the west, you can see, with a park. You can see the signs of a baseball diamond and a parking area, residential neighborhoods to the north, and along to the south and west, slightly along Forestville Road, is a string of houses, some of which have been adaptively converted to more commercial uses. Across the street and to the east of Forestville Road is a commercial industrial area. There's another rich natural environment up to the northeast corner of the site, but any passage along Forestville would not cause you to pay much attention to what we have discovered is an extraordinary environment, natural environment, just behind the veil of Forestville and the uses that are currently taking place on it. Excuse me. Next slide. The parcel map to the left shows you not only the large parcel that is in question and that is being offered, but the scale and makeup, the mosaic makeup of the properties around it. The slide to the right, or the image to the right, is a beginning translation of some of these amenities. And it's useful to see in that slide that which you can't see so easily, either from the air or even in a walkthrough on the site. You can see the scale, the size of the circles, of the green circles are relative tree sizes. You can see there's a lot of intermediate, but a few beautiful specimen hardwoods that are on the site that will, of course, be of interest to the various stakeholders and constituencies that will be reviewing proposals. And of course, it would be advisable that any developer recognize that those are assets that future residents and that the county itself cherish and will want to retain and cultivate and integrate into their development. The development area that's hatched, that's that cross-sectional hatch in the upper right-hand corner, is really just, I'm going to call it the easy developable portion of the property. You can see that it doesn't make up a large proportion, maybe a third of the property, which would be quite easily and conventionally developed for the townhouses. But it doesn't mean that it is the only area that's developable. And so we're going to take a look at the end of this segment of the presentation at different strategic ideas of thinking about the more challenging portions of the site and how they might be integrated into a truly special, extraordinary project. Next slide. One of the things that designers, planners, architects like to do is to understand that complexity in what I'm going to refer to as layers. And Michael is going to share with us some of the very early and preliminary research that is readily available on the county's planning department atlas and the GIS websites. This illustration to the right is not our site. It's just an illustration of showing that, like we did, the aerial photographs below, the contours, the streets, the fabric, the urban fabric, all of which, in the natural environment, of course, all of which conspire to create that rich tapestry of the site. We're just going to sort of lift up and take a peek in at some of these ingredients for you, but you're going to probably want to visit the atlas and some of this information, and certainly you can reach out to us. We've done a lot of work to dig up insight, and we're happy to share it with you. Michael, next slide.
Sure. As Garth was saying, this is just a peek at a handful of layers that are available on the PG Atlas, publicly available. And so we're using GIS to get a better understanding of the condition of the site, but also to better understand the challenges and opportunities. And so on the left, we see a parcel map of the site, as well as in green, the forest cover. And on the right, we see the forest cover now in lighter red, and we see the streams in the kind of darker red. And the width of the streams here is much wider than the stream itself because it's identifying the buffer that is necessary around the stream and around the wetland area. And so this is an example of how we're using these layers to better read, better understand the site, and to better understand how we can optimize approaching the site and where to optimize placing buildings on this sensitive site.
The site is a host of one of the key spring-fed tributaries to Hinson Creek watershed. And that watershed is one of the vital arteries that feed the bay and help contribute to the health of the bay, the well-being of the bay. So it's, if you think about it as a head and tail, this is up at that headwaters. And one of the remarkable things is that these springs run almost year round. You can visit them and see them. You can walk in the woods. You see the effect they have on the growth, the botanic growth, that is an attractor for wildlife. And it's important to the county to begin to really take and cherish, feature, even open for interpretation some of these ingredients. As development pressures continue to grow, the idea of protecting them, but also interpreting them and joining with them, making them more humanly accessible and appreciated by the residents of the county, are part of the centerpiece of what we are trying to do to help advise developers of how to do that. These photographs show some of the scale and age of the trees. The lower, I've got the upper right show you the edge of one of these standing wetland seeps that hold water year round. We think they were created actually by the early farmers and settlers to just take and collect those seeping springs and perhaps feed cattle or make their own water sources available. They are likely to even have been important. These fingers that go up into the woodland areas around the bay were certainly probably important to Native Americans. We know enough about Native settlement to know that they were important. So the idea here is that we too should cherish these sources. We too should honor them. We too should build around them and complement them, because they're really the lifeblood of the environment that the county so enjoys. Next slide. Another aspect of this site, and the site now is shown in that little red odd shape, solid on the right and outlined on the left. The extensive network that has built up on the right of the primary roads and distributors. You can see how close we are to a major couple cloverleaf exchanges in the Suitland Parkway. We are actually along the southern edge of the site, comes to and peaks out onto the Suitland Parkway, one of the most scenographic drives in the greater metropolitan area, comes and, if you will, kisses the edges of our site. So making it even more extraordinary. But now it's hard to see or make known that presence. And that may be an opportunity the developer wants to take advantage of. On the left is the bus lines that link the site easily in each direction to two of the major metro stations in the DC area. And those same bus lines easily connect to a lot of the major amenities throughout the metro region and throughout the immediate area around the site. Next. As mentioned before, the historic or the history of the site is really significant, and it's not to the extent to which you need to be in any way anxious about its need to be protected. There is no evidence of literal ruins or findings, but the site is at that point where any curious resident and or visitor could witness worldviews that are part of its history. One of the things that most of us have noticed when we're on the site, we're actually immersed in a world that's quite different than you witness by street and by commercial development or work sites throughout the county. When you step into this site where it's the zone that's protected, you actually see the world as the indigenous people and the early settlers did. This map that's in the center of the slide is really quite a revealing map where you can see the watershed and the fingers that come up from the watershed. Well, this is really how natives and settlers came to the property and how they came to understand it. And you can actually experience that on the site. And that's one of the things that we would like to see sensitive developers take advantage of, that perhaps the outlook from the development residences, the homes that are developed for the site, peer into this historic window and this ecological window of its history of the county and the areas around the bay. Next. One of the things that we really want to underscore, and I know all of you who are thinking about a proposal for this, is that the developments, very few developments, are islands unto themselves. Yes, legally and financially, they're the source of your own interest in the work you do, but they are also tied to complex and critically important systems. And these systems can be thought of, as Michael has shown us, graphically, but also conceptually. And they really should be in the future of the county's vision of itself, the stewards of this great ecology and the stewards of the social and political capital of the county and the region. There should be recognition of how it is that this development proposal that you're advancing would be tied to these circumstances and the surrounding context. So we're going to give you a way to think about this to begin with. Yes, that's right. Next slide. Thank you. And you can see in this map, and this is the one that you see in the RFP, so it probably looks familiar to you, but you can see our effort to begin to interpret the portions of the site that are really do need to be protected and honored. And those are highlighted in the green. And you can see how that long boundary with the park to the west and their sharing in support of this spring-fed seep that goes down to Henson Creek. All of those can be and should be left intact, but development can finger into it, but very carefully and sensitively. We do have a survey of the site, and we have background information that ultimately, when you advance a proposal and take it through review and approval, are going to find that there's going to be a great deal of interest, and specifically how you're engaging this natural environment. This is just a quick broad brush look at how that might manifest itself, where there is some buildable areas, but those areas begin to step into this natural environment. And we'd like to really make sure that you understand that that's got to be done with great sensitivity. There is another historic house that's on the corner of the property, very unassuming when you go by and down Forestville Road. We believe that's the remnants of the farm that might have come here and helped develop this property, maybe even establish this water basin that served its cattle or its wildlife or its farms and agricultural interests. And that's immediately adjacent to the site. So now what we're going to do, and this is the last just few minutes, we're going to fly really quickly over a strategic engagement of the site. So what we've done here is neutralized graphically that large floating extraordinary natural grove of trees and the wetland. And we're going to just show you points of entry. I think that's the first one here. Logical points of entry. Next slide. And from Forestville and possibly along what's called Suit Road to the south, so that access to the site is, because it's not bounded or connected in many locations. Some of you might be tempted to look on the west side of the site where a street comes right up to the water shed itself, but that would require crossing that watershed, that protected watershed, and probably not a very good idea, but it might be a great pedestrian access to draw the adjacent community onto the site and into the same amenities that this development is going to enjoy. Next. It's really important to think ecologically about the streets and infrastructure. What we're showing you here is not, let me emphasize, is not a proposal you should just grab and work with. All it's doing is beginning to show you where roads might modestly, with a small amount of site consumption, enter the site efficiently and bring you to the townhouse developments and sectors that are spread throughout the site. But I want to underscore it. This is just a highly conceptual view. Our hope is that many of you who look at this and bring your professionals on board come up with even more creative ideas. Next. That lends itself to some townhouse development that you can see is considerable. There's a fair amount of room. This may be more than you want, maybe less than you want, but you know that this is going to be a negotiated and mediated process so that this natural characteristics are not burdened. Next. One of the things that is not a part of this RFP, and there's no relationship to it, but you will not be able to miss the fact that there are two very large adjacent pieces of property. One of them is currently a salvage yard and is a very active salvage yard to the south, and it runs right along the parkway. Another is a largely vacant site that has been over time, the last few years, been up for sale. The thought was a large commercial development, et cetera. That too is highly potential for significant augmentation or enhancement of the development opportunities of this site. Now, again, underscore, this is not a suggestion that the Redevelopment Authority is recommending or feeling would be critical, but we from the university can't help but recognize when you put those pieces into the puzzle, you can see how much integrity and integration there is with the residential remnants around it. It creates a large sector that really does embrace the ecological attributes of the site and the watershed. Next. Again, not, entry points then grow in terms of frequency and availability. And that those sites are zoned differently and can receive higher and greater density going through the proper procedures, and probably even more potential affordability with the different building types. The site is, committed to townhouses, but there may be a desire to get smaller, more affordable, single owner occupants, et cetera, different than townhouse types, immediately adjacent to the major arteries that could complement the site. We've took and looked at many versions of this. We're just going to show you one and then jump and be done. Next. So you can see by this that other more substantial development, even a large central park on the north side, could be advanced and could help the financial pro forma and frankly, the capacity of the county to continue to serve growing metropolitan needs. And that concludes this presentation.
Thanks, Garth. No questions on that. I guess it's because you're very, succinct. Although shooting back to Ernest, there's a question about the deadlines. Is that Eastern Daylight Standard Time, Ernest, your deadlines?
Yes, good question. It is Eastern Standard Time.
All right, great. Again, just a reminder, any questions, please just put them in the chat box and we'll address them as it fits in well. Michael, you are on mute, sir.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself. Hello, I'm Michael Hindle, and I'm just going to give a rundown, an overview of this concept of regenerative development. I think that we'll just jump right into it. This is not a question of requirements of the county, as Stephen said earlier, but the concept should inform how we approach the project. So currently, I think we all know that we live in a system that is heavily dependent on resource extraction. You can go to the next slide. And this has generated a condition where the imperative for regenerative design is real and it is acute. And there are any number of areas in which we can show that this, how acute it is and how much we need to participate in this kind of development. We extract our resources and we have a one-way trip of linear economics that extracts resources. We have profligate consumption, and then we abandon the very facilities that create the goods and leave people, in the next slide, dealing with unspeakable levels of disinvestment. Now, all of this is part of the sort of large distribution network of corporate generation of goods and services and distribution of those, and the local integrity of communities has been eroded. So the next slide. I'm sorry, I feel like every other word is going to be next slide, but but it's really important that for everything from energy and the pollution from that energy, including carbon, any plastic object, any human soul, there is nothing that you can throw away when you are on a closed loop system, being our planet. The next slide. So we need to turn from the current mode of production, consumption, and development to something that is not just sustainable, because sustainable would mean meeting the present needs of our current population without impairing the future generation's ability to thrive as well. However, we have already severely degraded future generations' ability to survive by consuming roughly 2.7 times the amount of resources that the planet can sustain. So we need to move into something called regenerative, in which we develop in such a way that we actually repair and regenerate damaged systems. Next slide. So this is the paradigm shift that we need to embrace. And we apologize, some of the graphics did not come across here. I'll just visually describe. The heavy dark brown arrow to the left shows more energy and less stable forms of development. And downward from the center of this quadrant, you would see spiral arrows going down. In other words, this is the downward spiral of typical degenerating systems. The normal way we do things is the very orange bar at the bottom. Okay, if you go into green standards such as LEED, green globes, any of them taken on their own can start to be less degenerating. But we need to change the conversation from being moderately or marginally less bad to being 100% neutral, which would be sustainable. And that would be just underneath the horizontal bar. But what we then need to do is turn the downward spiral into a virtuous cycle that goes upwards and to the right. And that's, in order to do that, we need to do ecological thinking and whole systems understanding. Next slide. And as human beings, this implies that we fully embrace the circular economy. And that means we do not, we extract and produce and reuse as efficiently as possible, and do so with as many renewable resources as possible, and leave very, very little waste leaving the system. Next slide. So the good news is natural systems basically teach us everything we need to know, because we know nature creates vibrant, diverse abundance and beauty with no waste. Next slide. So we have diverse abundance, we have interconnection and interdependence of different elements within the system. We have balance and resilience because they're mutually supporting functions of all these niches. And there's no waste coming out of this system. Everything becomes a nutrient for something else. And we can start to see this in the context of a block or a townhome development as a series of mutually supporting nested scales, technologies, and systems. And if you start to diagram it, yes, it starts to look like a curvy spider web, but there's an inherent logic to this, which we could get into at great length, but not in this presentation. Next slide. So just to take one of these issues, energy. Next slide. Buildings play a huge part in the energy profile in this country, but also around the world, and the carbon emissions associated with it. So you can see here that these are AIA 2030 images on the right. Buildings use something between 40 and 50% of the energy and the resulting carbon emissions. And you can see that the high income countries such as the United States are by far, and this is on the left slide, are by far the worst per capita offenders. And so we, as the worst offender on a per capita basis, need to bring down our carbon emissions dramatically, such that people living in abject poverty, which as it turns out is rather sustainable, unfortunately, could begin to improve their quality of living. So we need to rebalance the lack of equity across the energy and carbon emissions profile of the whole planet. Next slide. So one way to do this, and we're using the words passive house here. I'm a passive house consultant, and I certainly advocate this, but one way to do this is to use a standard such as passive house, because it holistically, systemically addresses the building as a system to create incredible energy demand reductions. And we can achieve 90% heating load reductions, something like 60% cooling load reductions. And then if you deal with plug loads and lighting loads wisely, you can end up with a net 60% reduction in energy demand before you ever touch renewable energy. So this is the path to zero. You do less harm and you focus on bringing demand down first, such that our renewable energy and microgrid systems can do the best work for ourselves and our community. Next slide. You have to start with attention to site, the orientation of the buildings, and the massing. And so Garth and Michael have just gone through one series of layers that could inform how one addresses this site. I'm going to add another one, which is that solar gain is the source of all energy on the planet, and it can provide pretty much all the heat we need, but it can also, in our climate, drive cooling loads very severely. So we need to pay attention to the orientation of the buildings, the massing of those buildings to take advantage of that free energy and avoid unwanted energy, and build in fixed shading or operable shading, or even live vegetated shading to avoid unwanted solar gain in our climate. It's very, very important. Next slide. A shelter which is this efficient is incredibly comfortable and is incredibly durable, but you must start by clearly defining the thermal envelope. You can see the red line diagram on the left, and the airtight envelope, which is the picture on the right. Now this, with a skilled designer, this is a zero added cost practice. It is just a mindset, but it delivers remarkable levels of efficiency improvement. Next slide. Then we're going to insulate that defined thermal enclosure well. Insulation is by far the lowest cost way of dealing with power. Like the levelized power, the levelized cost of new grid facilities exceeds the cost of insulation many times by many orders of magnitude. Next slide. Excuse me. Now we also have to eliminate thermal bridges, and the graphics have gotten a little funky here, so apologize for that as we transferred files. But basically many buildings are essentially designed to be radiators and lose heat, but we are taking, in the middle image, it's an infrared heat transfer model. You see the heat flux magnitude, a lot of heat escaping through the connection of a foundation to a wall, and that is a code-built building, a 2x6 with a 2-foot frost skirt, and the connection of the wall to the slab edge or stem wall loses an immense amount of heat. The lower image is a redesign of that to eliminate that thermal bridge. So this is possible if you approach the design mindfully from the start. Again, this can be a zero added cost change to your design. It's a mindset, it's design attention. Next slide. We're also, we have to focus on the whole building envelope, and the weakest link in the building envelope are windows and doors. And this is where low energy buildings really bite the bullet. You pay more for the best available fenestration. This is for comfort. It's also to avoid condensation on interior surfaces, and it reduces energy loss dramatically. On the right-hand side, you can see a building below that has not been retrofit to passive house standards. And on the upper image, you can see a building that has been retrofit. And the windows, while still the weak link in the top image, are better than the walls used to be. So these are very good windows. And there are more and more affordable products available. Next slide. Now you have an airtight envelope. You need balanced continuous ventilation. We do not want an imbalanced building that sucks air in or pushes air out through the building enclosure. We want a balanced pressure environment, and we bring in fresh filtered air 24/7, 365 days. You can still open your windows on nice days, but this machine delivers clean, heat exchanged air, reducing the heating and cooling loads associated with ventilation to the tune of 85%. Next slide. Now, in order to do all of this, it really does require integrated design. We all learn about it in architecture school, but you actually have to do it. And that's hard in a world in which our professions are still rather siloed in the design process. Next slide. In order to, with that integrated design team, our structural engineers can help us avoid thermal bridges and help us create a continuous thermal enclosure where often there are structural elements that penetrate the insulation. We can manage the vapor profile to make sure these are the most healthy and durable buildings ever built. And the air tightness, which is essential, is not hard to achieve if it is properly detailed and documented, and if we train our contractors. Next slide. And this slide just shows a series of images of thermal break measures, air sealing measures, pre-sealing around tacked on parts of the building, anchor bolt sealing, thermal bridge mitigation with mineral wool around a foundation. These are all things that we know how to do. We just need to detail the drawings properly. They're, if done properly, we can deliver, next slide, we can deliver buildings built as affordable housing. In fact, Passive House has seen more growth in the affordable housing sector than in any other. And we can do so affordably and effectively. So all of what I just described is passive design first. Then we get to active gains, which is generally achieved through solar PV, though it's not the only way. So again, I'm going to restate, if we reduce demand, we reduce our primary energy and the load on the environment, and this is the path to zero. Next slide. There has been much attention given to the cost effectiveness of this standard and of high performance building. And you can see the little arrow, the knee in the bend is cost starting to turn back up as you achieve greater and greater efficiency. And at that point, the standard is pegged. So we get the most cost-effective life cycle benefit to the building owners. Next slide. Again, these are simplified, replicable, and high performance if we have a collaborative integrated design team. Next slide. Very briefly, the green bar on the left shows when an integrated team can make really effective decisions. The blue line is the effectiveness of our decision-making process over time. And you'll see that as you move forward through design, the effectiveness of your ability to change design goes way down. And the green line shows that over time, the cost of making those changes goes way up. In an integrated or passive, mindful design team, your green bar, your blue-green bar on the left is when you're going to make your big decisions and do it in an integrated way. Typically, in most projects, we wait until VE discussion after people are already getting ready to buy out contracts, and that is when it is more expensive and less effective to make changes. And of course, chasing solutions during construction is a disaster. So if we want to do this cost effectively, we have to front load the design process in a collaborative way. Next slide. Carbon. This is very important because energy really becomes sort of a proxy for carbon when we're on a planet with severe climate change. Next slide. So we need to bring down operational energy, which is what I've been discussing through passive measures and active solar generation. However, if you believe, as I do, that the tipping point of dramatic climate change is on the right side of this bar at 2050, and you can see where we are now, the yellow bars, the yellow vertical bars are embodied energy, which is to say energy sunk into building the building. The operational energy are the cumulative bars mounting from left to right. So if we are going to, and you can see this chart shows that by 2050, embodied energy is still even with operational energy in terms of carbon impact. So while Passive House is very much an operational energy standard, we still need to pay attention to embodied energy. Next slide. This slide just shows that some foam insulations have very high global warming potential and in fact can undo the benefit of insulating well. So XPS foam and closed cell spray foam are horrible from an environmental perspective, from a climate perspective. Next slide. And in this This slide shows us that we can build the building type. The building type is illustrated on the top, the little icon. You can build conventionally and emit 241 kilograms of carbon equivalent, or you can build a little greener on the next slide, which is 90 kilograms emitted. But if you are very careful, I'm sorry, can you go to the prior slide? I'm just, the two on the right show that by building with renewable energy, sustainably harvested wood, and carbon sequestering materials, you can build a carbon negative building to the tune of 137 kilograms carbon equivalent. So we can actually build a regenerative building. Next slide. And this all takes place through specifying lower carbon intensity concrete, choosing rapid growth cycle carbon storing crops as insulation materials, etc. Next slide. And here's an example of someone in Baltimore doing just that, building sustainable lumber, and the wood fiber insulation on the exterior of the building is a carbon storing material. So this would be a carbon negative building, the mock-up that we did for one of our projects. Next slide. Again, another image of carbon sequestering products. This is a school in Europe. Next slide. Okay, now we know about renewables. We have the efficient building, we put the renewables on the roof, but we know that that can cause mayhem for the grid because you have an incredible drop in demand during the day and then a huge load ramp. The lower image, the image in the lower right shows an incredible load ramp when the sun goes down and people are using energy. So we need to add energy storage, which is of course the premise of the microgrid, which will be spoken about more in detail later. Next slide. So briefly, as I wrap up, I just want to go through a concept of interdependence, just illustrate it and how it might apply to this site. So we can go to the next slide. So stormwater hits a site. We know that American lawns are monocrop and they're essentially ecological deserts and they don't hold stormwater. We're developing with impervious surface. It causes incredible flash floods, overflows of storm and sewer. And this causes incredible ecological and human crises. Next slide. The lawn, typical development, is one of the most guilty parties in this dynamic, not just in terms of the nutrients that run off, but also the vast and rapid quantity of water. Next slide. Now we know that the forest that is already present on the site is the best way to keep us cool, sequester carbon, slow down water flows. The heat island effect is very severe. And so when we clear trees, we're actually exacerbating climate change. My house, the stone on my house in a suburban development gets to 125 degrees on a 90-degree day. This causes real problems. Forest is essential. Let's retain as much as possible. Next slide. And if we design our communities properly, we can capture our water. We can use it to reinfiltrate or to irrigate, and we can grow useful crops. Next slide. So we can undo the damage of stream depth and rapid erosion. I'm sorry, I'm waiting for the slide to change. And we can even practice regenerative agriculture within even some very small pieces of lawn, which provide shading, provide food, utilize stormwater while releasing it slowly back into the environment. And restorative agriculture sequesters vast amounts of carbon in the soil. In other words, a small backyard plot or a wisely designed site starts to look like a pretty radical approach to sustainability. Next slide. So that is, I believe, I'm waiting for the slide, sorry. That's basically a transition into further discussion later on in our presentations about the environmental site design requirements, which are going to be the foundation for how development can be done without being radically destructive, but rather being regenerative. So it's actually relatively easy if you approach the mindset, both with respect to your buildings and their integration into the site. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. A couple of housekeeping questions that we can conglomerate together. And I believe the answer is yes. It is, will the presentation be available or on the RFP website? And will it be a full copy? Ernest, can you clarify that for the people?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. The question is, will this presentation be made available on the RFP website or will they receive a full copy of this presentation?
Yes, we will be posting a recording of this workshop on the RFP, on the RDA site. I believe we will do it via an addendum, but at any rate, it will be made available through the RDA site.
Thank you.
Yes, and as well, a transcript, if you prefer to read.
Let me just add something really quickly here, Brian. The exceptional and really effective presentation that Michael just gave underscores the importance of the teams that are proposing, the importance of professional qualifications, experience, insight, innovation. It's really important in these RFPs to think about who it is, who are your architects and engineers, what experience, what commitment do they have to these values, and how might they help you achieve a project of the standard that the county and the authority are looking for. So.
Great. Thank you for that, Michael and everybody. So we're going to move on. The county, Don Hawkins Nixon is going to take the next presentation. Don, are you ready, right?
I am ready.
All right. Have a great one.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dawn Hawkins Nixon, and I am the Associate Director for Sustainability Division of the Prince George's County Department of the Environment. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you a presentation on the Climate Action Plan. Next slide, please. Again, I am a staff of the Prince George's County Department of the Environment, which staffs the county's Climate Action Commission. So this morning, I'm bringing to you an overview of that proposed action plan. It's currently under development, and establishing some ties between the recommendations of the plan and sustainable community development. Next slide, please. So as many of us hear in the news all the time about strange weather events occurring here in the United States, even locally in our county, but also internationally. It reminds us, just these news reports and the frequency with which we're hearing of these changes in our weather, that our climate change is here, and we are almost in a race to prepare ourselves for how much change we're in store for. Next slide, please. So the Prince George's County Climate Action Commission was stood up last year in June of 2020 by the Prince George's County County Council. And this plan was created to effectively, the commission was created to effectively develop a climate action plan for the county that would identify those measures that must be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to prepare the county to become a climate resilient county. The plan, again, is under development. We're currently drafting the plan as I speak. Will include greenhouse gas inventory for the county as a whole and also for the county government. We will identify emission reduction targets. We as being members of the commission, will identify those climate change risks and vulnerabilities. And we will also stress the importance of doing outreach and education to the community to really help all of our residents understand the risk that they are exposed to due to the changing climate. Next slide, please. So our plan has been developed, or is being developed under the guiding principles of all recommendations and ultimately the roadmaps for implementation of those recommendations to be evidence-based, factual, feasible, and implementable, as well as bold and ambitious. So we recognize that many of the recommendations that will be put forth in the plan are very ambitious. Can we fully achieve those, the goals, the recommendations, the targets within 5 to 10 years? We hope so. We're really thinking about the ways that we can do what needs to be done as quickly as possible. But when we release the draft plan, the readers, the industries, the sectors that are impacted by some of those recommendations, I'm sure we'll have some thoughts about whether these actions are truly feasible and implementable, but we feel as though we need to be bold and ambitious to set that target really high in consideration of the urgency of adaptation and building resilience in our county. Next slide, please. So we have, as a commission, identified those areas in which the county has the most influence. So we understand that spheres of control is important when thinking about what levers the county and the greater community have to enact change. We do take effort to understand and to really work through these recommendations to identify actions that we as a county can take and make specific and meaningful steps towards implementation. So actions identified in the plan will be cost-effective and implementable by the actors involved, given the budgetary and staff capacity constraints. Next slide, thank you. So with regard to our current policies, our current regulations, we recognize that many of these policies and regulations have not really been updated or amended to reflect climate resilience, right? So we understand that going forward, we will need to change how we do business, and that we is not only government, but it also includes business in the community. We have identified in our list of recommendations for the plan what we call operational recommendations, and those are overarching recommendations as applied to policy and legislation, new legislation, and regulations. So these recommendations will not have immediate impact, but over the long run, it will help us as a county government to put in place those measures that will help us to reduce our emissions and to build resiliency in our county. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to really step into some of those recommendations, which the Climate Action Commission has put forward and agreed upon for further development into blueprints. So our first recommendation, and we call our actions, priority actions recommendations in the plan. Our priority recommendations will include accelerating renewable energy and energy storage. So essentially, this recommendation promotes development of resilient energy systems through the creation of partnerships, incentives, and financing for solar PV and other renewable solutions. And it also promotes the continued installation of renewable energy systems on new and existing buildings. The next recommendation is increasing energy efficiency. So within county government, this recommendation proposes adoption of consistent approach to building benchmarking across all county-owned buildings that creates a common baseline, enables tracking and identification of building retrofit opportunities. It also encourages financing solutions, incentives, and technical assistance for residential and commercial buildings to improve energy efficiency through deep energy retrofits. And also it prioritizes assistance to seniors, low income, and other vulnerable communities to retrofit their homes or provide energy efficiency upgrades. Next slide, please. Our recommendations also include transitioning to electric vehicles. So the plan will support EV infrastructure deployment, EV infrastructure deployment on multifamily housing and commercial properties, and really promote and support accelerated deployment of EV vehicles. Next slide, please. Enhancing walkability and bikeability. So this recommendation really gets to reducing vehicle miles traveled and hence reducing carbon emissions by providing alternate modes of transportation. The plan will encourage the provision of these alternate modes around activity centers in order to take advantage of those resources that are already being built in design for activities such as the transit systems and the bike share stations and the like. Next slide, please. This recommendation is probably one of our more popular, I guess, recommendations based on some of the feedback that we received on these recommendations during a previous community engagement meeting. So in Prince George's County, flooding due to not so much riverine flooding as surface water runoff during I guess, short rain bursts. These short frequent storms are causing a lot of flooding in our county. You know, back in September, we had a really significant rainfall amount within an hour or two that created quite a bit of flooding in the central part of our county. People's basements were flooded, their cars were flooded, their yards were flooded. And, you know, when those types of events occur, you're kind of helpless, right? Because it occurs so quickly and so fast and with warning. So I do want to highlight in this particular recommendation for preparing the counties for flooding is that we will reevaluate. We're recommending a reevaluation of our stormwater standards by implementing the recommendations of our Department of Permitting, Inspections and Enforcement regarding improving the access to information on what is your flood risk. Sometimes residents don't know what their flood risks are, so we want to increase that awareness. We're also encouraging preservation of our flood retention capacity, especially in our floodplains, but it could also be in stream valleys where there is no identified floodplain. So preserving and increasing, if possible, the capacity of natural areas to manage additional flooding will help create our flood resilience down the road. We will also look at strengthening our woodland conservation ordinance and recommend that we create or expand existing incentives for residents and local businesses to plant trees that expand the urban tree canopy. We recognize that wherever we develop properties, whether in a preferred area or sensitive area, we are going to lose tree canopy. And we know that our green infrastructure will be impacted. But we really challenge our development community and our building community to really consider the value of that green infrastructure and the value of trees when it comes to providing shading and cooling and sequestering carbon and providing the stormwater runoff capture and thereby reduction to flooding. So, there are opportunities to develop in a way that's compatible and less intrusive when it comes to encroaching on our green space. So the plan will encourage development community to consider how to replace the value of trees that are lost and to enhance the natural stormwater management features, focusing on streams and wetland restoration and enhancement. And of course, we always, and it's a code requirement that stormwater be treated on site. So maybe consider how we might treat all stormwater on site, such as minimal grass and more rain gardens or other water quality focused landscaping. And the avoidance of impermeable space beyond rooftops is also a way that we can reduce that runoff amount. Next slide, please. So again, this gets to kind of tying the climate action plan to the Forestville Sustainable Community Development. As the RFP reads, the site has wetlands. We can see on our GIS system the presence of green infrastructure, which is that dark green area in the map shown, the left-handmost map shown, and it's mostly along a stream valley. Of course, we can see the tree canopy. So again, this green infrastructure is almost a first line of defense for us when we think about the impacts of climate change. So the extent to which we can limit and maybe enhance what is there and find value in replacement of whatever loss that we have, and this green infrastructure and trees through alternative landscaping. I think this type of approach will prepare us to ensure that not only the proposed community, but other surrounding and downstream communities are more resilient to climate change impacts. Next slide, please. So again, as I had mentioned earlier, we will be implementing the Climate Action Plan through county planning and operations. We will look at land use and we will look at our zoning codes to identify those areas where we can build climate resilience into the regulations and into those codes so that we can create that environment for future development that will help us help the county as a whole become a more resilient community. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just add in a few other plan recommendations that seem to be a big hit with the county, or rather the community who joined in on our last community meeting. And so the community is ecstatic about zero waste and finding ways that the county can help the community as a whole reduce the waste amounts and divert the waste away from the landfill, and thereby reduce the carbon, the greenhouse gas emissions from the county landfill. Next slide, please. We also recognize the importance of educating the community about climate change. So the Climate Action Plan will stress and will include a recommendation to ensure that we engage the community and the various actions and recommendations that are included in the plan, and educate the residents as to how those actions can benefit them and how they can take advantage of some of the implementation measures that will come out of those recommendations. Next slide, please. Also, we recognize that many of our most vulnerable communities will be probably the hardest hit by climate change. And to that effect, the plan will include a recommendation for resilience hubs. We acknowledge that there are some populations, such as elderly populations, some of our low income populations, that will be hard hit by the impacts of climate change. So the need for resilience hubs is evident, and the plan will recommend hubs to ensure that these populations will have the resources to seek relief and support during and after severe weather events. Next slide, please. This recommendation for sustainable food systems and increasing access to healthy foods. Again, this was a big hit with our communities, and it basically promotes a healthy food system supported by low carbon and conservation agricultural practices. Next slide. So currently, the Climate Action Commission, with the support of our consultant team, are in the process of developing blueprints that will identify the roadmap for implementation of the priority recommendations. These blueprints will include milestones and benchmarks, identify the ownership and the responsible parties, and also identify what it will take to effectively implement the recommended actions. And the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen basically just shows, gives you a sense of what the blueprints will look like in terms of the outline and the broad statements. Next slide, please. So our climate action report will stress the necessity, the urgency of taking climate action, and it will also highlight the benefits of climate action in terms of environmental benefits, human health benefit, and economic benefit. Next slide, please. So we have upcoming meetings that will be open to the public, and we encourage all who are on this call this morning to attend those meetings. The next meeting is our third community meeting at which we will introduce the blueprints, and the community will have the opportunity to provide their feedback. Please know that these community meetings are open to all. We encourage the building community, the development community to come in, hear the presentation, take part in the discussion. We are eager to get that feedback. Again, that community meeting is August 19th at 6:30. You can find a link to the meeting by visiting the Prince George's County Department of the Environment's website and even the County Council's website. And we also have a climatepartners.org website that's hosted by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. All of our meeting information and virtual house link is also provided at the climatepartners.org site. And secondly, our next Climate Action Commission meeting is scheduled for September 17th at 1 p.m. And again, you can find the meeting information at the various websites that I mentioned for the community meeting. And at the September 17th meeting, we will be presenting the draft plan to the Climate Action Commission as a whole for review and for consensus. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'll be around if anyone has questions.
And thank you, Dawn. That was a super great presentation. Being a resident of PG County, I appreciate the work you're doing, and it really dovetails in with the previous the presentation by Michael. It shows where we're going and what needs to be done. And it's a great opportunity for developers to move forward and do this the right way. So a couple of questions for RDA. Will a complete list of attendees of this workshop be made available to the participants or potential responders to the RFP?
Yes,
Yes.
the list of registrants will be published on the RDA website.
Great. And this one's a little bit more, detailed. So I'm just going to read it directly. Based on the presentation from the REACT group, it is suggesting that a commitment from development teams deliver zero energy buildings that regenerative designs is necessary. That is to say, should be development teams who have done this before. Are there any portions of the evaluation criteria which prioritize selection of teams who have proven how to do it? Based on the scoring in section 5.4, there does not appear to be a way to measure such qualifications. Is this read accurate?
We're going to have to, since that is such a long, detailed question, I don't want to answer it right on the spot today. So we'll take that under advisement, and we'll publish an answer with the rest of the questions and answers following the meeting. Probably a week or 10 days after this meeting, there'll be another addendum with all the questions, and that one will be addressed as well.
Okay, so another question that just came in, I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but it looks similar. It's a question for RDA. The building typology that is being suggested here is townhomes. Is that grounded mostly due to zoning, quote, matter of right? It seems that for this development to achieve, the more the better in terms of density, the townhome building types are inefficient use of valuable land, particularly on this site. The footprint of one dwelling unit is simply sprawling compared to more vertical building types. And are there any bonus scorings to find creative solutions to balancing this?
Well, yeah, so the zoning, the existing zoning and the proposed zoning with the countywide map amendment is what's driving the townhouse scenario here. That is what's allowed and what will be allowed by right. There would be a zoning process to go through if there was more dense development proposed, such as multifamily, and we would have to evaluate that.
Great, thanks. Moving forward, we're going to have Pepco do a presentation about the microgrid. Really excited about this whole process, and this is pretty cool. So Susan and Stephen, are you guys here and ready?
If you can hear me, I'm ready.
We're good.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. Susan Marinelli from Pepco. Thank you for listening in on the presentation today. We're excited to describe a microgrid aspect of this project. But before we get into it, I wanted to just piggyback on a comment that Ernest made at the beginning of the presentation regarding site visits. If your company would like to visit the site, this land is still Pepco land. We will be transferring it to the county in a couple of months here in the fall. However, we do need to request or need to generate, I should say, a right of entry document to just mark that you're attending the site and also take the appropriate safety precautions. So the best process to follow, and this can be provided, I think in the information from this workshop, the best process to follow is for your company to provide a certificate of insurance to Pepco. Will record your information of your company, allow your party to enter the site, but we also have some requirements that if you're going to survey the site or walk about the site, we do require sturdy boots, sturdy footwear, as it is unfinished. Also long pants. As we know, it's tick season, also mosquitoes are present, so we want to be sure that people are trying to protect themselves from the insects that might be on the site and also to wear bug repellent. So those are just sort of some safety precautions there. So the best way to schedule this site visit, if you're interested, is to contact Ernest Williams at RDA, and then he'll be in touch with us and we can follow up on the procedures for accessing the site. So with that, let's get into the microgrid discussion. Again, Susan Marinelli from Pepco. I'm the project lead on this from the Pepco standpoint. So handling the project management, making sure that things go smoothly for our piece of this project. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Stephen Park, who is our distribution and technical standards expert with regards to microgrids. So we'll be tag teaming this presentation. Next slide, please. We did our introduction, so just a couple items that we'll be discussing, the definition of a microgrid. Also, we've conducted a feasibility study for this Forestville community. So we'll be speaking on what a potential microgrid might look like for this community. Also, we are part of the bid review process for this proposal. So we will be having a role in reviewing the community developers' proposals. We want to make sure that you understand what we're looking for, what we're thinking about with regards to your contributions to the microgrid as well and to the project. Next slide, please. So just really quick about Pepco. Specifically, we are part of a family of utilities, the Exelon utilities. And so we have service territory in Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, Prince George's County, but we are supported by a network of other utilities that span the Mid-Atlantic region, as well as ComEd in Chicago. So altogether, the Exelon utilities serve more than 10 million customers, cover 6 states, and we can leverage each other's learnings to advance new technologies and to look at new ways of supporting electricity distribution throughout our systems. So when you're working with Pepco, you're actually working with all these other companies, and we bring our expertise to the table to support projects such as these. Next slide, please. So a microgrid, as you can see the definition here, is a local energy grid with the capability to disconnect or connect to a grid, to a traditional energy grid, and then also operate autonomously. So the microgrids are often developed for a specific end user function. In some cases, it could be you need to set up a microgrid in a remote location that maybe does not have support of a traditional utility grid. You might need a microgrid for resiliency purposes, or you might be looking to develop a microgrid to add more distributed energy resources to a particular location. What are distributed energy resources? Well, those are those renewable energy resources such as sun, solar, wind, combined heat and power, other fuel sources that generate electricity. And then within that small located area, you have a distribution network that is able to operate autonomously, seamlessly, to make sure that those generation resources are feeding the right areas for various end uses or off-takers, or also being stored perhaps in batteries, perhaps in a thermal storage situation. So just at a very high level, that's an overview of what a microgrid is. But to help hone it in a little bit more, I'm going to pass it over to Stephen, who will speak about a sample microgrid structure and kind of describe how this actually works.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Susan. Just looking at the microgrid out there, this is a sample of a microgrid structure. And one of the things that we want to talk about here is the communication side of the microgrid, right? So if you look at the black box in the center out to the grid, and like a couple of the black boxes with two rings, that's symbol of the switch stuff there. So that's how the microgrids will be connected physically to the grid itself. The red lines and blue, the green line, and the control that are shown here is really seeing how the microgrid will have to have a communication of their own, the control of their own, and also how it interacts with the utility, right? So our grid. So microgrid can have a load. Obviously, the houses are load out there, and they got a number of different DERs we mentioned for solar generation, the batteries, the micro turbine, that type of items out there. So the local micro operator will have control over that. However, it'll be visible to the grid, so that we can maintain it. The goal is really if the grid is having an issue, where microgrid can stand up themselves and have that resiliency and reliability for the customer who are serving. So the different lines, the green lines and red lines, really kind of shows some of the communication stuff that we need to do. So it's a little bit more complex than our traditional services, where it's going from the substation to our transformers to the meters. On top of that, if we will need to have some sort of communication device to the DERs, our utility. Brian, the next slide, please. This is also another example from our ComEd microgrid that was pilot that was done. It kind of shows you basically the lines in the middle, the long lines going to the lateral are the microgrid itself, the feeders. You can see that, if you're familiar with the one line out there, you can see a number of different switchings, and you can see the different load, different customers who are residential customers, also police, hospitals, public library, which are pretty integral part of the neighborhood. Microgrid can be feeding a small microgrid like what we're trying to do here with the Forestville site, or it can be as big as it's kind of number quite large city blocks. So the ComEd here is just an example of that, where you can have a number of different resources tied together so that the customers being fed by this microgrid will be almost never out of the power. Yeah. Next slide. So some of the generation, we already talked about this a number of times by different speakers here. So the different generation assets, we're looking for the solar panel on the roof. And then the other one is the kind of on-site generation, 1 megawatt natural gas micro turbine. We don't expect the micro turbine to be operating unless there is a long duration outage from the grid itself. The battery is included, and there's not being able to get enough source from the solar panels themselves. And then we have a storage components where we want a centralized battery for the community on top of that can harness all the PV arrays, PVRs, and and have that ready just in case. Out there. And other additional resources, right? The EV, the electric vehicle charging stations are going to be key. We're kind of expecting, what we'd like to see is, electric vehicle charging stations or infrastructures within each household, but also there's talk about the type of thing where visitors parking lot could have potential charging stations, and there was actually a type of rebate that we can kind of help with getting that established, so that help with the finances. Other characteristics, building efficient homes, we've talked about a lot, so I'm not going to go into that at all. And smart technologies, having a solar is one thing out there, but being able to have smart, efficient, appliances and how to manage that is going to be key as well. As something that we'd like to see. And the operation out there, we definitely want to have some ownership of this microgrid, infrastructure, and working with the grid operator. With that, Susan, I think this.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Yep, thank you. So we want to be clear, and I think it's stated as such in the RFP, that the community developer is not responsible for the development of the microgrid. That will be a separate entity. However, each developer, whether it's for the community or for the microgrid, will need to coordinate. As you can imagine, there's a lot of infrastructure that will need to be placed anew in this particular site. And so therefore, the sharing of site plans, the communications about the scheduling and the installation timelines of the project will be critical to make sure that the project is stood up on time and most efficiently as possible. So we are actually supporting a different microgrid right now within the PEPCO service territory, and we're finding that relationship between the community developer and the microgrid developer is crucial to ensuring the success of the project. So just to use the best practices of project management and make sure that this is done as efficiently as possible and with minimal interruption to the site and having to redo certain aspects of what might be accomplished in the development at one point. We don't want to have to go back and redo anything to install the microgrid. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, PEPCO will have a role in the bid evaluation. There's a possible 10 points for our evaluation criteria. And the highest scoring opportunities will be to those community developers who have had experience delivering energy efficient homes, to some standard. It could be a passive house design. It could be LEED certification, what have you. But we also want to see a developer that might have had experience incorporating renewable technologies into their design and have had to work with multiple community partners in a cohesive manner to collaborate on such an energy related project. So I think that concludes our remarks. And if there are additional questions, certainly reach out to RDA, but if there are specific questions regarding microgrids, please feel free to contact us for more information. Thank you.
Thanks so much, PEPCO. Just so everybody knows, Stephen was a little garbled, but we do have a transcript. The transcript came out, I was watching as it went, so it looks like it should be understandable, and we'll go back, as Patty mentioned at the beginning, and try and correct as much as we can. Also on that, in Ernest and Stephen, I'm gonna kind of answer a question, but I want you to check me on it. Somebody's asking, can we publish a list of all the questions and answers that are given here? And it is my assumption, and through our conversations, that as with any questions for this process, will be published for everybody to have. Correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you. All right, up next, Peter May, Green Streets program. This is it's really exciting because it's something that's new. It's something that is an answer for a few of the questions that different presentations left. And it's also possibly a lot of money that's going to help do it. Peter?
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Peter May. I'm a research professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Technology and affiliated faculty with landscape architecture, and was the faculty lead for water and living systems on the Solar Decathlon React entry. And so I've actually learned so much more about the built environment and its integration with the with its landscape and its, and ecosystems by participating with this team over the years. And so I'm very excited to relate to you some details about this grant that we received this spring that will dovetail nicely with our project kickoff here in the fall. And we look to be coordinating this grant effort with any of the or the proposer that does win the day on this project. Next slide, please. So a green street, what is a green street? It's a program, but this as a definition, it minimizes the impact of development on a landscape through a natural system approach, but it incorporates not just water quality and stormwater, is what many people that are aware of this program are familiar with, but also energy efficiency and other environmental best management practices. It reduces or ideally eliminates water piped to streams that cause erosion. And this site in particular has 2 small headwater tributaries that are adjacent to the site, that are on the site actually. And so that'll be important with any responder. But in terms of this Green Street grant, the effort makes the best use of tree canopy. As earlier presentations have noted, the site is a majority forested, mature forested hardwood, some of it forested wetland area. And these in the headwaters of Henson Creek are really actually very, very important to the ecologies of not just the site, but everything further downstream. So green streets also like to take advantage of tree canopy as it exists. And many people think of them as programs that look at putting street trees into a project area, but also maintaining, to the extent practicable, the tree cover that you do have. Temperature mitigation and air quality improvement flow from tree canopy, and even if they are street trees, reducing that heat island effect is very important, as well as air quality improvement. And not to mention, carbon sequestration, which in the climate action presentation was related as being very important. Climate resiliency, which is part of that with carbon sequestration and urban heat island reduction, are very important, but also flood hazard mitigation planning. And that was brought up extensively in the climate presentation. And so really, trees and green streets, ideally through their stormwater management, they help downstream environments manage and deal with floods more effectively. This is, as I said, a headwater branch of the Henson Creek tributary, and Henson Creek, which really is one of the handful of a couple of streams and watersheds in Prince George's County that have a county-based framework for watershed management approved by the county council, actually, dating back to the 60s in terms of flood mitigation. Also important to it is encouraging pedestrian and bicycle access, and also importantly, providing an aesthetic advantage to a community. When you have more trees, they're more, the community is seen to be more quote unquote livable. Part of that's because of the add-on effects of reduced temperature in the environment, but also that intangible of the aesthetic to the eye, whether you know it or not. When you see a green space, you're mentally you have a more relaxed state, believe it or not, than you do with a hardscape. And those obviously are add-ons that have very direct human health benefits. Next slide. So this grant is really a first step. It's a whole program with the Chesapeake Bay Trust And what it is the REACT think tank we applied for with this project in mind for a grant. And as I said, the winning proposer will that money won't be available until this fall. So whoever comes on to win this proposal, this grant and this effort on the part of the REACT think tank will be there to work hand in hand with the winning proposer to implement this. And as Michael Hindle related and Garth reiterated, working with this transdisciplinary team from the very beginning to make a better project outcome. When you do that, you have better outcomes. And so that's part of the idea of applying for this grant, but also receiving it, which was a great aspect to this project. So part of it is a conceptual plan that we will develop with you to develop a high-performing green street and green stormwater infrastructure that needs to treat at least 1 inch of runoff. And that may seem like a lot, but that's kind of the standard. And when it's raining and you get 1 inch in a few hours, you understand how much water that is, but it is doable. And it will be part of this broader integrated watershed plan. And as I said, we're not developing a new watershed plan. There are watershed plans that have been already developed in decades past that are somewhat dated now, but they are approved by the county. And so a lot of what is involved with this grant and Green Street development design will feed directly in and dovetail very nicely with existing watershed plans that have been done for Henson Creek. And I should actually mention that Henson Creek is named after, if many of you who are not from the area might not know, but is named after Matthew Henson, who was a Southern Marylander, a Black man who was a famous explorer, only really being more recognized now. But he was actually literally the first one to hit the North Pole, I think in 1909. With Perry, and he was part of that team, and so this creek is named in honor of him, which is rather auspicious. So this output needs to have a high likelihood of implementation, but when we believe that any of the proposers working with us on this grant is going to see the benefits of it as it fits into this larger green framework, sustainability framework, which isn't just the literal energy, the joules delivered, or I should say kilowatts to the site through renewable energy, and the microgrid component, which is driving this project. But in systems ecology, we look at everything has a direct relationship back to energy. So water is energy in our minds, and it's also carbon. And so when we implement this grant, it's a planning grant. For the concept, there are other grants through this program that are available for further design, up through 90% design, and then also for implementation. There's money available from this program. So this is the first step in that, and this concept plan and this effort, and it's a rather competitive grant program. So we were very fortunate to get it. And it's funded, if those of you who are in state have seen Chesapeake Bay license plates, those license plates fund this program, as well as Maryland Department of Natural Resources and money through EPA. And they expend many millions of dollars every year to support this program. And so we're very excited with that. The Prince George's County Clean Water Partnership is actually unique in the country. It's the first ever watershed-based and water quality and quantity-based partnership, public-private partnership, a P3, that involves the private sector and the county in implementing stormwater management across the county. And it's part of this grant and part of this effort fits very well, and they actually work together in implementing microbiome retention at a community scale. And this is just actually, this is just across the street from where I live in Greenbelt. There's an interpretive sign for a rain garden. And many of you have heard of rain garden and the rain garden concept, or bioretention and smaller scale microbiome And that actually very proudly, as a Prince Georgian for 30 years now, that was founded in Prince George's County. The name and the concept was developed by Prince George's now Department of Environment back in the 80s. And so this we should be very proud of and embrace this which is a very important aspect of the Green Streets program, is employing very small scale at the source microbiome retention to handle stormwater. Next slide. These are just some associated images. These are actually projects that I worked on and actually helped design through a grant from DNR and the Anacostia Watershed Society. Many of them are for this school in Riverdale that takes stormwater from this elementary school and manages from the building on the site in a very small scale, and provides for treatment and infiltration. And there's also a project here in Prince George's County, or I'm sorry, they're all in Prince George's County, but in Greenbelt where I live. And so these are common. You all are probably familiar with many examples of this, but the slide in the upper right hand corner actually takes water from the street and delivers it into the front entranceway of the elementary school for an aesthetic planted feature. And so there's a lot of latitude with developing designs that are site-based, unique, innovative, and that's really the exciting part of it, to develop these. Next slide, please. One of the really exciting aspects of this this Green Street grant that I'm interested in is implementing some of these novel advances in porous asphalt paving. And this figure actually is from a National Asphalt Paving Association design guidelines that were developed by Holland Schwartz. And there's a paper that I'm happy to share with anybody related to this as we moved down the line in this direction. But we're talking about using this. This has been done. This site is ideal for it, because what you're doing is, by creating the paving that enters the road, that enters the site, that it actually becomes the BMP. So you don't need to do any offline larger scale structural systems like stormwater quantity control. You are actually, the road is the best management practice. And this is just a general cross section of what that looks like. But it should be noted that Dr. Schwartz, who's is cited in this and helped develop this, he is the chair of the Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering Department at University of Maryland, which is at where we all work. And so he's a pioneer in this and has implemented it at many scales. And we're looking to partner with somebody to try this out, not try it, but to implement it and look at its at the relative success of it. And the site is important in that it's as Garth had related, there's a spring that emanates from the site that is groundwater that is coming to the surface on the hill slope and forming part of the wetlands that are in the middle and southern portion of the site. And so that's groundwater driven. And so the soils on the site are such that they percolate water very easily to a shallow lens that then moves underneath the ground to support the wetlands and the stream further down in the property. And so by taking water that's hitting the street and infiltrating it immediately into a reservoir and infiltration bed that provides treatment and then supports the groundwater to the site. This is really being done at smaller scales, but it's novel. But it also something that we think will help make the site a lot more sustainable from the landscape and water perspective. Next slide. This slide is of Sidwell Friends School, actually, in Washington, D.C. And this is a great example of a project actually that I was able to get green lighted when I worked for DC government in the late 90s and early 2000s. This is a LEED Platinum school in Washington, D.C. The Gores and the Obamas sent their children there. And then later, when I left DC government and went to work for an ecological engineering company that managed this project. So I managed this, the stormwater and wastewater treatment components of this. And so this really is a slide to relate that this is done. There's a great example of it. And so manipulating some of these ideas from this site to manage stormwater and also gray water, even if we were interested, black water on the site is entirely possible to achieve those goals of gaining greater, basically manipulating the built environment to try to replicate natural hydrologies on the site. And let's see, is that the last slide or next slide, please? Okay, so that's the last slide. So this also fits in well with environmental site design, which is a program from the 2007 Maryland Stormwater Management Act. So that's a desire to manage stormwater on site to the maximum extent practicable, and that effort, this Green Street grant will support that. And so if we implement aspects of this grant and this concept and then design towards those directions, we're going to be meeting absolutely the goals of the Maryland Stormwater Management Act. And so that should not be a concern from any developers. It should be understood that we in REACT have that expertise and that knowledge to work with you to make this happen and make a successful project. Thank you.
And thank you, Peter. The Environmental Finance Center, that's up next. There are no questions, but I just would like to remind people that just to limit distractions, please just be off camera unless you're presenting. And it is now the Environmental Finance Center. And Patty, who is presenting for this? Oh, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Sorry, good morning, Jennifer. Please go right ahead.
Thank you. We'll try with camera on. I apologize. I am I'm a little remote today, and my internet is not the most stable. So if we get glitchy, just give me a heads up, and I can turn my camera off, and we can go that direction. Thank you all for a little time on the agenda this morning and for joining us. You've had a very full program so far, so I will keep my remarks brief, but I am Jen Cotting. I'm the director of the Environmental Finance Center. And if you're not familiar with us, we've been a part of the University of Maryland for almost 30 years now. And we are currently located within the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. And we are one of a network of 10 centers across the country that was initially established by the Environmental Protection Agency to help folks figure out how to pay for the resource protection and restoration activities that are really important to them. A lot of that work focuses on supporting local governments. A lot of that work is also helping local governments connect to the nonprofit organizations and the private sector entities that are operating within their boundaries and contributing to their natural resource priorities. So, excuse me, so we think about ourselves as being translators of all of the good research and scholarship that's happening at the university. We're almost like the extension office in that we take all of that and we help that hit the ground in communities. So we work on water issues, sustainability issues, resilience issues, climate, energy, all of the environmental resource sectors. But again, at the end of the day, we're a finance center. So we're always really thinking about how are we going to pay for the things that we want to do. Next slide, please. So in thinking about the Forestville project, I think there are a number of ways where our center could potentially support a successful bidder as a part of this, as a part of the team. I think that there's great value in looking at this particular project a little differently. Instead instead of, I'm sure you have heard from many people this morning, instead of a focus on just maximizing profit, I think there's a really special opportunity here to achieve so much more. And I think the type of role that our center could potentially play in helping achieve that, y'all heard from Dawn Hawkins-Nixon this morning about the county's efforts on developing their climate action plan. We have the good fortune of being a part of the leadership team that is supporting that effort. So I think one of the things that we could help do as these translators is to help make sure that that we're maximizing the opportunity to align the development of this parcel with the county's climate action priorities. There's a lot going on in the climate action plan that presents a real opportunity to do a showcase on this parcel. And I think we could help with facilitating that. We are skilled at, we're a center that's skilled at stakeholder engagement and facilitating consensus, and having very community-driven, developing really community-driven solutions. And so I think that we could play an important role there. But we're also at a university, right? So we are good researchers, excuse me, and good translators of that research. And so I think we could help a successful bidder link to some of the benefits that come from using really innovative and sustainable development practices. We have a history of working with land trusts and with on land transfer transactions that we could build upon. We could help the successful bidder leverage existing resources and programs. We have strong relationships with the state agencies that we could leverage. We also have, we are although we are located at the university, we are a 100% soft funded organization. So we work entirely on grants and contracts and fee for service. So we have really strong relationships with the philanthropic community. So I think there's an opportunity for us to help a successful bidder align their design and their sustainable design principles for the parcel with the priorities of the philanthropic community that invests on the ground in these types of projects, and leverage that philanthropic investment and just better maximize what the opportunities are on this site for the winning team. And then again, we're researchers as well. And so, we are skilled at looking at the types of models that have proven successful elsewhere. And again, translating those in a way that makes sense for the site that we're talking about here in Forestville. So I think I think there's a really amazing opportunity to make this parcel a showcase for the county, but also a showcase that becomes a model for the state on just a new approach to environmental site design, and again, potentially nationwide, just an opportunity to be a poster child for how we can do things differently in a landscape where things are changing very dramatically, and it's time for, it's quite honestly we're overdue for a new way of doing things. And we'd like to see that happen on this site as an environmental center. We think there's a lot of opportunity there. As a finance center, we think there's a really special opportunity for gaining efficiencies and maximizing the co-benefits and the return on investment that happens with this particular development. So with that, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer any, but those were the ideas that I wanted to share with you all today.
So great. It's yes, just a reminder that any questions go in the chat, and I will flag them to the correct people. Everything is being recorded, and it is also the transcript is also being duly noted. These will be made available through RDA. So I'm just talking to see if there's anybody that has questions and are chatting anything up. Other than that,
Brian?
yes.
I would like to say just a few things. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope that you are now as excited as we are about this site. The RDA is wonderful to work with. PEPCO is wonderful to work with. So we are actually looking forward to more collaboration with the development community. Plus, you know, in the end, with the offerer who actually wins the proposal. I just want you to know that when you sign off today, there's a very brief survey. Only one question is required. And if that's all you want to answer, that would be fine. But I would really appreciate it if you attended to that. Thanks a lot. I thank you for your attention.
Great. So Stephen, Ernest, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, we're very excited about this project at the RDA. We think it's going to be a model and a showcase going forward for how development is going to happen nationwide. I think this project is going to get a lot of positive publicity on a nationwide basis if we do it right. And we're looking forward to working with a really qualified development and builder team. And thank you all for participating today. And as we have said before, all the questions and answers from today will be posted. You also have plenty of opportunity to ask questions as we get further into the process by emailing Ernest, and all that information has been provided as well. And the closing date is September 30th, and we look forward to seeing your proposals.
Great. As with most Zoom meetings, we end unceremoniously. I want to thank everybody for coming out and wish you all a pleasant day. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.